My brother told my dad I'd emptied the family's estate account, $22,000 that had been sitting in a joint trust since our grandmother died. My father gave me until Friday to wire it back or he was calling his attorney. What neither of them knew was that I worked in bank compliance, and I had already pulled every transaction record from the day the account was opened. The wire transfers didn't come from my login, they came from my brother's. One printed spreadsheet at Sunday dinner didn't just clear my name. It ended a 30-year lie they had all been telling about me. Make sure you're subscribed, because this is the story I've been waiting my whole life to tell. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from today? I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Thursday evening with a half-eaten bowl of ramen in front of me and a compliance audit open on my laptop when my phone buzzed. It was my father. I almost didn't answer. We had talked to Grandma Ruth's memorial 2 weeks earlier, which was already more contact than we'd had in 6 months, and I had driven home from that feeling hollowed out in a way I couldn't fully explain. Still, I answered. Dad, hey. Nadia. His voice was flat. Not the tired flat of a man who'd been grieving, the flat of someone who had already decided something and was just delivering the verdict. I'm gonna make this short. Your brother called me this morning. My brother, Desmond, 3 years older than me, currently living in the house our parents bought, driving the car our father co-signed for, and still managing to present himself as the competent one. Okay, I said carefully. The trust account, my father said. The one your grandmother set up for the two of you. Desmond went to check the balance this morning because he was looking at making a withdrawal for the roof repair we talked about. It's nearly empty, Nadia. $22,000. Gone. I put down my fork. What do you mean, gone? I mean gone. I mean transferred out. I mean the account that had $22,000 in it last month now has $412. Dad, I didn't. Desmond said you've been having money problems. His voice tightened. He said you mentioned something to your cousin about struggling with your rent. He said you've been asking questions about the trust for months. I asked one question. I asked when it would be distributed, because Grandma Ruth set it up for both of us and I wanted to. Nadia. The single word landed like a door slamming. I trusted you with access to that account. Your grandmother trusted you. The only reason your name was on it at all was because she believed in you. I opened my mouth and closed it again. There was something in his tone that I recognized, a particular kind of certainty that had nothing to do with evidence. It was the tone he used when Desmond told him I'd cheated off his homework in 7th grade, when Desmond told him I'd scratched his car door in the driveway, when Desmond told him at 20 years old that I had borrowed money from the grocery fund and never paid it back. I hadn't done any of those things, but my father had believed them all. I'm giving you until Friday, he said. Wire the money back into the account. All of it. $22,000. If it's not there by Friday noon, I'm calling Lawrence. Lawrence was his attorney. They had been friends since college, and I'll let him figure out the rest. Dad, please just listen to me. I've heard enough from you. I've heard enough from both of you over the years, and I'm done mediating. You wanted access to that money, apparently, so badly you couldn't wait for the distribution. Fine. Then you can figure out how to put it back. He hung up. I sat there in my kitchen for a long time. The ramen went cold. My laptop screen dimmed and went dark. The thing about growing up as Desmond's younger sister is that you learn very early that the world sorts people into categories that have nothing to do with who they actually are. Desmond was charming. He was funny at parties and helpful with yard work when company was coming, and he gave elaborate compliments to my mother's cooking in front of her friends. He was also, in private, someone who had borrowed money from me 4 times and paid it back twice. Someone who had taken the last of my grandmother's homemade jam that she'd specifically put my name on and eaten it without mentioning it. Someone who once told a girl I liked in high school that I had said terrible things about her that I had never said. Small things, individually forgivable, but they accumulated like sediment at the bottom of a glass, and over the years the picture of me that my family held was not one I had painted. It was one Desmond had painted, in thin, careful brushstrokes, over a very long time. I was the difficult one, the oversensitive one, the one who always had to make everything about herself, the one who, as my father had said more times than I could count, needed to learn to let things go. I had let so many things go that I had practically disappeared. But this was different. This wasn't a jar of jam or a borrowed 20. This was $22,000 from a trust our grandmother had spent years building for us. Money she had saved from her teacher's pension and her late husband's life insurance, and her own careful, quiet discipline over decades. She had died in February, and her money was being used as a weapon against me in April. I stood up from the table. I walked to my bedroom, and I opened my work bag, and I took out the notebook I use for audit trails, the one with the green cover that I've had since I started in compliance 8 years ago. I sat down on my bed, and I wrote down everything my father had said, word for word, as close as I could remember it. Then I wrote down what I knew about the trust account. I had been added as a joint trustee 18 months ago when Grandma Ruth's health started declining and she wanted to make sure the account would transfer cleanly. The bank was Heartland Federal, a mid-sized regional bank I had actually worked with professionally on an unrelated audit 2 years prior. I knew their account access protocols reasonably well. I knew that every login, every transfer initiation, every authorization was logged with a user ID and a device fingerprint. I knew that joint accounts required the initiating party's credentials, not just any authorized name. I also knew that I had not logged into that account in 6 weeks. Because I kept a password manager, and my password manager logged access history, and the last time I had touched anything connected to that account was when I updated my contact information in February after I moved apartments. I wasn't afraid of what the records would show. I was afraid of how long it would take to get them, and whether my father would actually wait until Friday, or whether Desmond would talk him into moving faster. I picked up my phone and called the bank's account services line. I was on hold for 11 minutes. When someone finally answered, I explained that I was a joint trustee on a trust account and that I had reason to believe unauthorized transfers had been made and that I needed to speak with the fraud department. The woman I spoke with, whose name I didn't catch, was professional and calm. She told me that because I was an account holder, I had the right to request a full transaction history, including login records and transfer authorizations, and that she could submit the request tonight for processing. She also told me, very carefully, that if I believed fraud had occurred, I should consider filing a report before initiating a dispute, because it would create a cleaner paper trail. I thanked her. I asked her to submit the request. Then I hung up and sat in the dark for a while. In the morning, I went to work, which was perhaps not the most emotionally coherent decision I'd ever made. But I was in the middle of a vendor audit that couldn't wait. And also I needed the distraction. I work for a financial services compliance firm. My official title is Senior Compliance Analyst. What that means in practice is that I spend my days reviewing transaction records, identifying anomalies, and building documentation that either clears an account or flags it for investigation. I am, professionally speaking, very good at finding things that people tried to hide. My manager, whose name I won't mention because she has nothing to do with this story except that she was kind to me, stopped me in the hallway around 10 in the morning and asked if I was okay. I told her I had some family stuff going on. She nodded and didn't push. I was grateful. The email from Heartland Federal came at 2047 in the afternoon. It contained a secure link to a downloadable PDF of the account's full transaction history, including the login and authorization logs for the previous 90 days. I waited until I was home to open it. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to be somewhere I could react without an audience. I sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where I'd gotten my father's call the night before, and I opened the PDF. The transaction history was 14 pages. The trust account had been opened by my grandmother and maintained at a low balance for years before her health declined and she began consolidating her assets. In the 18 months since I'd been added, there had been modest activity. A few small withdrawals, 2 deposits, and then, in the last 5 weeks, 6 transfers totaling $21,588. I went to the authorization log. Every single transfer had been initiated from the same user ID. It was not mine. The device fingerprint matched a browser environment I had never used. The IP addresses were all within the same geographic cluster, a suburb about 40 minutes from where Desmond lived. The access times were almost always between 9 and 11 in the morning, which happened to be when I was at work and verifiably logged into my company systems from a completely different device and location. I set the PDF down and looked at the wall. Desmond had not just taken the money. He had apparently done it methodically, in small enough increments to avoid the automated fraud flag threshold over a 5-week period, He had then called my father and told him I had done it. I thought about the timing. Grandma Ruth had been gone for 2 months. The trust was set to distribute at the 6-month mark, which meant Desmond would have needed to wait until August for his legitimate share. He hadn't wanted to wait, and he had apparently decided that the cleanest solution was to take the money now, blame me, and collect my share as restitution on top of it. It was a $44,000 swing if it worked. His half plus mine. I printed the authorization log, I printed the transaction history, I printed the IP geolocation summary, which I generated using a publicly available IP lookup tool that cross-referenced the address clusters. I put them in a clear plastic sleeve inside a manila folder. Then I called my father. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. "I told you Friday," he said. "I know. I'm not calling to argue about Friday. I'm calling to ask if we can have dinner Sunday. You, me, Desmond. And if Aunt Carrie wants to come, she can. Grandma Ruth's table. I'll bring food." A pause. Why? Because I want to resolve this in person, and because I think there are things you should hear face to face. Another pause. You have the money? I have everything you need, I said. He said he'd call Desmond. He said 7 o'clock. He said if I was planning to make excuses, he didn't want to hear them. I said I wasn't planning to make excuses. When I hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. My grandmother's table. She had left the house to my father, who had been letting Desmond live in it, which was its own separate conversation. But that table, a big round oak thing she'd had since before my father was born, was where she'd fed us holiday dinners for 30 years, where she'd helped me with homework, where she'd told me once, very quietly, while Desmond was in the other room watching TV, that she saw what was happening and that she was proud of me for not becoming bitter. I thought about that a lot, the next 2 days. Sunday evening, I drove 40 minutes with a covered pan of baked ziti and a folder that felt heavier than its actual weight. The house looked the same from outside. The porch light was on, Desmond's truck was in the driveway, a newer model than the one my father had co-signed. Aunt Carrie's car was parked at the curb. I let myself in through the back door, the way I had since I was a child. My father was at the head of the table. Aunt Carrie was on his left. Desmond was directly across from the empty chair, and he was the one I looked at first when I walked in. He looked fine. That was the thing. He looked relaxed, one arm on the back of his chair, a beer in front of him, a small, flat smile on his face, the smile of someone who thinks they've already won and is waiting politely for the formality to finish. "Hey sis," he said. I put the ziti on the counter and set my bag on the table and sat down. "Glad you came," Aunt Carrie said. She'd always liked me, I thought, or at least tried to be neutral. She looked tired. "I hope you two can work this out." "I want to hear an explanation," my father said. He wasn't wasting time on small talk. An honest one, not the runaround. "I'll get to it," I said. "But first I want to ask Desmond something." Desmond looked at me with the particular patience of someone performing patience. "When you called Dad," I said, "what exactly did you tell him you saw?" "I told him the account balance," Desmond said. "What I saw when I logged in." "You logged into the trust account." "I have access. I'm a trustee." "You're listed as a beneficiary," I said. "There's a difference. The trustees are me and Dad. You don't have login credentials." A small shift in his expression. Just a flicker. "I have access through Dad." "Dad," I said, turning to my father, "did you give Desmond your login credentials for the Heartland account?" My father frowned. "I may have, at some point, when I needed him to check something." "Okay," I said. "That's actually useful, because the authorization log from the bank shows all the access and transfer activity for the last 90 days, and I'd like you to look at it." I opened the folder and slid the stack of papers down the table toward my father. He didn't move. "Dad," I said, "please look at it." Aunt Carrie reached over and pulled the pages toward herself first. She was a retired school teacher, and she put on her glasses and read the way she had always read, slowly and completely. "Desmond," my father said, looking at his son for the first time since I'd spoken, "did you make withdrawals from this account?" "Nadia's trying to deflect," Desmond said. He didn't sound rattled yet, but the beer was in his hand now and he was turning it slowly. "She's been asking about the trust for months. She knew I was going to check the balance." "That's not what I asked," my father said. Aunt Carrie looked up from the pages. She looked at Desmond. These logins are not from Nadia's account. She could have used my login, Desmond said. She had access to the house. I haven't been in this house since Christmas, I said. And I can show you my work system's access logs from every morning between 8 and 5 for the past 5 weeks, from a device and IP address that is demonstrably in a downtown office building 30 miles from here. The silence in the kitchen was very different from the warm, food-smelling silences I remembered from this room. The transfers were made from the same IP cluster, I said. 9 out of 10 times between 9 and 11 in the morning. That's the window you're usually home, Desmond, before your afternoon deliveries. Desmond stood up. This is fabricated. It's a bank document, I said. She works in finance. She could have. Desmond. My father's voice came out low and strange, a register I had not heard from him in years. He was still looking at the pages Aunt Carrie had placed in front of him. These IP addresses. This location. This is 40 minutes from here. Dad. This is the zip code for your gym, my father said. The silence stretched. Desmond, Aunt Carrie said quietly, did you take the money? Desmond looked at her. He looked at our father. He looked at the folder in front of them and then at me. I needed it, he said. Not a denial. A justification offered in a tone that expected to be accepted. My father looked up from the table for the first time in what felt like several minutes. You needed it, he repeated. I've been carrying Miss House, Desmond said, his voice shifting now, going up, taking on the particular energy of someone who has been caught and is pivoting to offense. I've been here. I've been doing the maintenance, dealing with the property tax, driving you to your appointments when she couldn't be bothered. I'm the one who was here when Grandma Ruth was sick. I'm the one who sat with her. I deserved a bigger share. It wasn't fair that we split it down the middle when I did everything. So you took it, my father said. I borrowed it. From a joint trust, I said, without telling anyone, and then called Dad and told him I took it. She was going to spend it anyway, Desmond said. He was looking at our father, not at me. You know how she is. She was going to drain it on her apartment and her life in the city and never look back. At least I kept it in the family. You tried to have me reported to an attorney for theft, I said. I didn't think he'd actually. He gave me until Friday, I said. He told me he'd call Lawrence. My father pushed back from the table. Dad, Desmond said. Don't. My father stood up. He looked older than I had seen him look in a long time, the anger and the shame moving through him in a visible wave. You sat in my living room and cried, Desmond. You sat there and told me your sister had stolen from your grandmother's memory. You used her death to set up your sister. It's more complicated than that. It is not complicated. The words came out flat and final. You stole from the trust. You lied to me about who did it. And you expected me to help you collect double from your sister. I would have paid it back. With what? Aunt Carrie said. Her voice was quiet. She had taken her glasses off. Desmond didn't answer that. He looked at me with an expression that was something between anger and something I couldn't fully name. You always had to be right, he said. No, I said. I always had to be wrong so you could be right. Those aren't the same thing. I stood up and picked up my folder and my bag. My father said my name. I stopped. I'm sorry, he said. For Friday. For Lawrence. For not asking you first. I know you are, I said. But you didn't ask me first because you didn't need to. You'd already decided what kind of person I was. That's 30 years of deciding, and one folder of bank documents doesn't undo it overnight. I left the folder on the table. I told him it was his to keep. I told him to have Lawrence look at it if he wanted. Then I went back to the kitchen, put the lid back on the ziti, picked it up, and walked out through the back door. I sat in my car in the dark for about 10 minutes before I drove home. The fallout moved faster than I expected. My father called Lawrence the following week, not about me, but about the trust. The unauthorized transfers constituted fraud under the terms of the trust agreement, which my grandmother's estate attorney had drafted with remarkable thoroughness. Desmond was ordered to repay the full amount with interest as a condition of remaining a beneficiary. He didn't repay it. He transferred it and then transferred it out again to an account my father couldn't reach. There are legal proceedings that are ongoing and that I have deliberately chosen not to involve myself in, because I gave my portion of the trust to my father's care, and whatever happens to it is between him and whatever is left of his relationship with his son. Aunt Carrie called me a month later. She told me she'd been thinking about what I said at the table, about 30 years of deciding. She said she wanted me to know that she'd watched things happen over the years that she hadn't spoken up about and that she was sorry for her part in the silence. It was one of the most honest conversations I'd ever had with a member of my family. My father started calling more often. Not to talk about Desmond. We didn't talk about Desmond. He called to check in. He asked about my work. He asked once, very tentatively, if I was dating anyone, and when I said not currently, he didn't follow it up with the usual comment about not waiting too long. He just said, okay. I kept expecting to feel satisfied by all of it, by the records. By the moment at the table when Desmond said I needed it instead of I didn't do it. By the attorney. By Aunt Carrie's call. And I did feel something. But it wasn't the clean, conclusive feeling I had expected. It was more like the feeling after a fever breaks. The crisis was gone, but you still remember every hour of being sick. 6 months later, on what would have been my grandmother's birthday, I went to the cemetery by myself. I brought sunflowers, which she liked, and I stood there for a while without saying anything because I couldn't figure out what to say. What I felt standing there was that she had known. Not about the money. She couldn't have predicted that. But she'd known the shape of the problem. She had added me to that account herself when she was still sharp enough to do things deliberately, and I had always thought it was just a practical decision. But she had been a meticulous woman who thought carefully before she acted, and she had not added Desmond. She had added me. On the way home, my phone buzzed at a red light. I glanced at it. A message from an unknown number. When I got home and looked at it properly, I recognized the phrasing as Desmond's. Hey, I know you don't want to hear from me. I'm in a rough spot. Wondered if you could lend me something just to get through the month. I read it twice. I thought about the 30-year pattern of small things. The borrowed 20s and the jam and the homework accusations and the girl in high school and the Friday deadline from my father. I thought about what it means to keep lending someone something they have no intention of returning. Then I blocked the number and put the phone face down and started making dinner. The ledger, as my grandmother used to say, always balances in the end. You just have to be patient enough to let it close. I keep coming back to the moment my grandmother added my name to that account and not my brother's. At the time, I thought it was logistics. She was practical that way. She didn't make gestures, she made decisions. But she had watched the same family dynamic I had lived inside for 30 years, and she was a woman who read situations clearly and acted on what she saw. She wasn't confused about who Desmond was. She just didn't say it out loud, because that wasn't her style. She said it the only way she trusted would hold up. In writing, at a bank, with her signature on it. That's the thing about doing right by people quietly and consistently over a long time. It doesn't feel like it's building toward anything. It just feels like who you are. But it accumulates. People notice, even when they don't say so. And sometimes when it matters most, the record speaks for itself. What saved me wasn't luck. It was that I had spent 8 years learning how paper trails work, and I had never once used that knowledge for anything other than honest work. When the moment came that I needed it for myself, I knew exactly what to look for and where to find it. That's not a coincidence. That's what happens when you take your work seriously for reasons that have nothing to do with being rewarded for it. The skill was there because I had built it carefully and kept it clean. Integrity isn't just a moral position, it's a practical one. It's the thing that makes your evidence unimpeachable when someone finally tries to use your name against you. And the discipline it took not to panic, not to wire the money just to make it stop, not to fold the way I had folded so many times before. That came from somewhere too. I had been the family's pressure release valve for so long that absorbing blame had started to feel like a reflex. Breaking that reflex wasn't dramatic. It was just a decision I made alone at a kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night, with cold ramen in front of me and my hands shaking, to be as methodical about my own situation as I would be about any case that landed on my desk. I wasn't going to disappear quietly this time. I was going to do the work. I think about Desmond sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of tired clarity. He made choices. Every step of what he did was a choice. To take the money, to do it in small increments thinking no one would notice, to call our father, to sit at that table with a beer and a flat smile and wait for me to hand over what he'd already stolen. And every one of those choices had a consequence he didn't fully account for. That's how it works. Not as punishment from some outside force, but as simple arithmetic. What you do is what you are, and eventually, what you are becomes visible. My grandmother knew that. I think that's why she wasn't bitter either, even at the end. She had lived long enough to watch the ledger balance on its own terms again and again. She just wanted to make sure I had enough of a foundation to wait it out. I'm still waiting on some things, but I'm waiting with my name intact.